She called the single dad too poor for her daughter, then he bought her family empire. Before we begin, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that success is not about where you start, it's about what you refuse to give up on. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why one arrogant insult changed several lives forever. The day Margaret Whitmore laughed at Daniel Carter, she believed she was protecting her daughter from a lifetime of disappointment. She had no idea she was speaking to the man who would one day own everything she valued most. And when that day finally arrived, Daniel would have a choice to make, a choice that would reveal whether true wealth comes from money or from character. The story begins on a rainy Thursday afternoon in Chicago. Daniel Carter stood outside Whitmore Holdings headquarters wearing a suit that had been tailored 3 years earlier and repaired twice since then. The rain soaked his shoulders as he checked his watch. Inside the building, executives moved through marble hallways beneath crystal chandeliers. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Security guards nodded respectfully to wealthy investors and business leaders. Daniel wasn't one of them. At 32 years old, he was a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Every morning he woke up at 5. He prepared breakfast, packed lunches, helped Emma with homework, dropped her at school, worked 12-hour days, picked her up, cooked dinner, read bedtime stories, and then stayed awake until midnight building a small technology consulting business from his tiny apartment. Life wasn't easy. Some months, it felt impossible. But Daniel had made a promise years earlier. A promise beside a hospital bed. A promise to his dying wife. "I'll take care of her," he had whispered while holding her hand. "I'll give Emma the life we dreamed of." Since that day, he had never stopped trying. Not once. Not even when the bills piled up. Not even when clients disappeared. Not even when people looked at him with pity. Today was important because he was meeting Victoria Whitmore. Victoria was the daughter of Margaret Whitmore, owner of Whitmore Holdings, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest. But Daniel wasn't there because of romance. At least, not originally. 2 years earlier, his consulting company had secured a small contract with Whitmore Holdings. Victoria, then a rising executive inside the company, had overseen the project. Over time, professional respect had become friendship. Friendship became admiration. Admiration slowly became something deeper. Victoria was intelligent, kind, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite growing up wealthy. Unlike many executives, she treated everyone with respect. Receptionists, drivers, janitors, interns, and Daniel. Especially Daniel. The relationship had developed slowly. Carefully. Neither wanted to rush things. Especially because Emma was involved. Victoria had spent months getting to know Daniel's daughter. She attended school events. Helped with science projects. Read books with her. The bond between them had become genuine. Emma adored her. For the first time since losing his wife, Daniel could imagine a future that included happiness. A future that felt whole again. Today, Victoria planned to introduce Daniel formally to her mother. The thought made him nervous. Not because of Victoria. Because of Margaret. Margaret Whitmore had a reputation. People described her as brilliant, powerful, demanding, and merciless. She had built Whitmore Holdings into a billion-dollar empire after her husband died unexpectedly. Many admired her. Many feared her. Very few challenged her. Daniel entered the building and rode the elevator to the executive floor. Victoria greeted him with a warm smile. "You look nervous." "I'm terrified." She laughed. "My mother isn't that bad." The hesitation in her voice suggested otherwise. A few minutes later, they entered Margaret's office. The room resembled a private museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Rare artwork decorated the walls. A massive mahogany desk sat at the center like a throne. Behind it stood Margaret Whitmore. Elegant. Confident. Intimidating. She didn't offer her hand. She simply studied Daniel. The silence stretched. Then she spoke. "So you're Daniel?" "Yes, ma'am." Margaret nodded slightly. "The consultant." "That's right." Another pause. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Daniel sensed trouble immediately. Margaret walked around her desk. Her eyes moved over his suit. His shoes. His watch. Evaluating. Calculating. Judging. Finally, she looked directly at him. "What are your intentions with my daughter?" The bluntness surprised him. "I care about Victoria very much." Margaret smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had already reached a conclusion. "I'm sure you do." Victoria sighed. "Mother." Margaret ignored her. "Tell me, Daniel. What is your company's annual revenue?" Daniel answered honestly. Margaret's expression barely changed. But the number clearly disappointed her. "And you're raising a child alone?" "Yes." "Renting an apartment?" "Yes." Margaret turned toward the window. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she delivered the sentence Daniel would never forget. "My daughter deserves a partner, not a project." The room became silent. Victoria's face turned pale. "Mother." Margaret continued. "Daniel, I'm sure you're hardworking. I'm sure you're decent. But my daughter has opportunities, responsibilities, and a future that requires someone operating at a different level." Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. Still, he remained calm. Respectful. "I understand your concerns." "No, I don't think you do." Margaret faced him directly. "You're too poor for my daughter." The words landed like a slap. Even Victoria looked shocked. For a moment, nobody spoke. Daniel could have argued. Could have defended himself. Could have pointed out his achievements. Instead, he simply nodded. Because arguing with people determined to underestimate you rarely changes their minds. Victoria immediately confronted her mother. But Daniel quietly excused himself. As he left the office, he heard raised voices behind him. The elevator ride down felt endless. Outside, the rain continued falling. Daniel sat in his car for several minutes. Not moving. Not speaking. Just staring through the windshield. The insult hurt. Not because of money. Because Margaret had reduced his entire life to a bank account. She hadn't seen the sleepless nights. The sacrifices. The promises. The love he poured into raising Emma. To her, none of that mattered. Only wealth. Only status. Only appearances. That evening, Daniel picked Emma up from school. She immediately noticed something was wrong. "Daddy?" "What?" "You have your thinking face." He smiled. "My thinking face?" "Yep." Emma nodded seriously. "The one where your eyebrows do that weird thing." Daniel laughed despite himself. Kids had a way of seeing through everything. At dinner, Emma talked about school while Daniel listened. By bedtime, his frustration had faded. Watching his daughter sleep always put life into perspective. Money mattered. Success mattered. But some things mattered more. Standing beside her bedroom door, he made a decision. He would never try to prove Margaret wrong. He would focus on proving himself right. There was a difference. One path was driven by anger. The other by purpose. And purpose lasts much longer. What Daniel didn't know was that Whitmore Holdings was already beginning to crack beneath its polished surface. Years of aggressive expansion. Risky acquisitions. Hidden debt. Questionable leadership decisions. The empire looked invincible from the outside. Inside, storms were gathering. And soon, those storms would create an opportunity no one saw coming. Especially Margaret Whitmore. The woman who believed money determined a person's worth. Because the day would come when she would walk into a boardroom expecting to save her company. Only to discover that the man she once called too poor had become the owner of everything she spent her life building. And when their eyes met across that room, the real story would finally begin.